So the 2023 governance report defines 5 areas of global stewardship: performance, risk management, people, planet, and board operations. Our focus today is going to be on people, with the recognition that people impact all of the other areas in the report. So Melinda, let's start with you. When you think about human capital management or human capital oversight, it can mean a lot of things to different people. From your perspective, what does it mean and how is that evolving?
Thanks, Sherry. Listen, when I think about human capital management, much of the topics that were on that list that we just went through in the survey really incorporate a lot of pieces of human capital management. But really, if you take a step back, it's really about investing in people assets, right? Because we spend a lot of time in board meetings talking about physical assets and the financial investment necessary, which is, of course, pretty important. But we don't spend as much time on focusing on the people assets and some of that. So I would also argue that, or say that, beyond those traditional functions, so beyond the total rewards, talent management, talent acquisition, culture, etc., it also should include business strategy and the impact that people have on business strategy, and how that's kind of integrated together. So when I think about board oversight and differentiators, I'd say it's boards who inquire, ask, understand, and integrate the people metrics and strategy into the business discussion, right? Certainly you need to focus on the economics of the business, and should. Without the individuals to run the business, those economics can be at risk, right? Certainly some of those discussions are at the comp committee, but bringing those discussion on readiness of the organization, so that survey that talked about we have a ready workforce for the future, that was a pretty decent percentage that was agree, and maybe even a fairly decent percentage that was somewhat agree. I would argue those are the kind of conversations that ought to happen in the future, right? At the board, sorry, because that's where your potential risk is in your organization. Can you meet that long-term 3 to 5 year plan? And what is it that's getting in the way? I would also say that when you think about human capital management in today's world, there's so many moving pieces beyond the practical pieces that the board has to worry about, like what goes in your 8K, what goes in your 10K, what goes in your proxy, what goes in your sustainability report, because all of that has an impact on human capital management.
Thank you so much. Well, Theo, let's go to you. And I think it ties quite well with what Melinda said. The 2023 Governance Outlook Report noted a close correlation between HCM and long-term performance, such as productivity and supply chain impact, replacement cost impact, reputation impact, and more. When you think about the workforce of the future and the challenges, some of which we just read off, what do you see as the board's role?
Yeah, I think I would almost flip the question a little bit and say, which are the areas of the business that aren't impacted by human capital management? And the answer, from my point of view, is none. I think every single part of the organization is impacted by human capital management. As far back as over 100 years ago, Henry Ford said, the most important things in an organization aren't on the balance sheet. They're its reputation and its people. And as I think Melinda mentioned, having a framework from a board standpoint to talk about your 3 and 5 year plans from a strategy standpoint is terrific, because you're memorializing all your hopes, dreams, and aspirations for the company. Sitting underneath those aspirations are your financial plans. How are we going to do? How are we going to overperform? How are we going to mitigate against underperformance? And then sitting under that, I think the most important enabler of business capability is managing your human resources ecosystem and making sure that your people are engaged, making sure that your people are focused on those accountabilities in the business, that the strategy cascades down through the business. So I believe that human capital management is a part of each and every part of it. And even though we talk about in our survey, what are the things that are the greatest priorities? I believe it's yes, yes, and yes. All of those things are. The role of directors is not a simple one. We can't pick and choose between one or the other. So I think human capital management really goes through each and every one of these and will impact the future. One of the data points in the 2023 governance report says that 93% of companies are more likely to report financial success over their peers if they have differentiated talent management systems. That's an enormous number. So bringing this up as we are now at the board level over the past 2 or 3 years in particular as a topic is as old as 100 years ago with Henry Ford and as current as today. So I think it rolls through everything. The question about the workforce of the future and how do we think of that is complicated, but I think the thing that we can expect is we're going to have a more engaged workforce. We're going to have a workforce that's much more challenging of the things that we want to do, whether it's on hybrid work, whether it's on the things that we see at United Auto Workers, at UPS, or at the Screen Actors Guild in Hollywood. Workers are standing up and shouting out in a way that they've never done before. And that's not going to stop. And I think they have more tools today to be able to challenge organizations than they ever had before. One of the things that one of the reports from last year that I think is really compelling, and if the people on the session haven't read it, I would highly recommend that you read it. It's called the American Opportunity Index. It is a study that was done that looks at the case histories of 3 million workers, and it looks at 250 of the largest public companies. And rather than slice the data as which are the best companies to work for, they look at which are the best companies to work for individuals who don't have a high school degree, which are the best companies to work for if you're looking for stability, which are the best companies to work for if you want to join a company and leave and it's a launching pad for a better job later on, which are the best companies to work for to get promoted. That kind of information is out in the public domain. So employees and workers are coming to us with much better information than they've ever had before, so that the employer and employee of the future has to understand that people are going to be equipped in ways that they've never been equipped before, and that all this information is out there in the public forum.
It's extremely interesting. And Theo, though, given your roles, I mean, you've played a lot of roles. You've been a CHRO, several companies. You've been on the boards of several companies. What do you see as some of the most effective board practices for human capital oversight?
Yeah, as I said, I think it starts with setting up the strategy. And typically in our organizations, we do that with a 3 or 5 year view. And when you set up that strategy, I think it's really important to spend as much time and as much rigor as you spend on the financials with the conversation about human capital management. One of the interesting things about setting up a strategy is we have this ambitious plan that says we're going to grow by $1 billion over the next 5 years. What we don't do is then say, if I look at the human capital in my business, are they prepared to handle a complicated business that's going to be $5 billion bigger? If your business is a turnaround, is that turnaround executive going to be the same kind of executive I need in a growth mode? What are the skills and capabilities that person need? They may not be the right person, but we don't have those conversations anchored to strategy, and I think they should be. So it really starts with the strategy session and says, if we have all these great aspirations for the future, do we have the talent inside of the business to be able to meet those challenges for the future? The person who's good today may not be good in the future in this different workforce that we're planning. It starts there. And then every year we tend to look at those strategies again. We should also look at the human management processes on an annual basis. And those conversations are full board conversations, not just tucked away with the compensation committee or the compensation and organizational development committee.
Thank you very much. My own experience with institutional and private equity firms is that investors often have a little bit different perspective. As an institutional investor, what are your expectations of a board regarding HCM? What do you look for when you decide whether or not to invest?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been both on the active side and the passive side where I sit today as an investor. And you're absolutely right. The expectations can be very different. And I think some of those differences are grounded in the duration of the investment, the time frame that those investors bring to the investment and how they view various risks in the organization. You know, PE firms or active investors, typically when they think they're long term, they might be thinking 3 to 5 years out. When I think about investing in a company, I think about being a long-term investor measured in decades and decades and decades. I literally have clients that are putting money away today. They won't pull the first dollar of their capital out until after 2060. So that's the investment duration I'm thinking about. It's kind of like, you know, when you choose a place to live, if you choose to be a renter or you choose to be an owner. You know, if you're a renter, you think about certain things, but if you think about being an owner, you think about different things. You think about how long is the roof going to last? What shape is the foundation in? Do we need new windows? Human capital, to me, as a long-term investor, is the foundation for a lot of businesses. And we can talk about that in a while, how I think about that. But, you know, our hope is that boards treat the companies that they oversee like owners. You know, what does that mean? You know, first, that means treat human capital management as an enterprise risk, because that's what it is. And then the second thing is, just like Theo said, set a strategy. You know, what is your human capital management strategy going to be? It's not a silver bullet. There's not a one size fits all. Every company chooses a different way to tackle that risk. Once you do that, though, clearly delineate the responsibilities for managing that enterprise risk. Give us investors, you know, clear indicators of where the risk is in the organization. And a lot of companies are afraid to do that. But it turns out a lot of companies have the same problems. They just aren't willing to talk about those problems. And because they're not willing to talk about them, they don't understand that everyone's facing some of the similar challenges. But once you do that, you know, explain to us as investors, as shareholders, what are you doing to manage that risk? And then provide us with some objective information to help us measure what the outcomes of those risk management efforts are. That's really the baseline expectation that we have as investors of how you approach the problem.
And in our early conversations, you talked passionately about hearing employees, and I've seen it referred to in other places as capturing the employee voice and incorporating that into the board's oversight. Could you comment on that further, what that means to you? And
Sure. And this goes back to some of the Future of the American Boardroom Commission work that we did. Yeah, most boards, when they have experiences with employees in the organization or when they receive data, you know, from the organization on human capital, oftentimes it's very carefully vetted and curated by management. And there's a question in some directors' minds that we talk to through the process about whether they're getting the full picture of what's happening in the organization. And it turns out some boards are taking steps to move beyond those very carefully curated interactions with employees to having uncurated, spontaneous interactions with employees. You know, have a board meeting at, you know, a major facility and have lunch with a group of employees of all, you know, levels in the organization, or yeah, lots of different ways that directors are doing this. But, you know, moving beyond just the curated experiences that management provide the board so that the board can get a better handle on what is actually going on in the culture of the organization, what's actually going on at various tenures of the organization, how different employees are thinking about their job, their workplace, how they fit in. It's an important piece that I think a lot of boards, frankly, just don't have.
If I can, Sherry, I want to comment on a couple of things that John said. One is this idea of having a long-term view, even in a world that is so unpredictable, like the one that we're in, right? We couldn't have predicted a recession. We couldn't have predicted COVID, all of those things. But I do think having a hardwired process to continually look at, do I have the talent for the future? Am I thinking about my organization is critically important. And having the directors have an understanding of what the societal architecture or culture is of the business, and being able to answer the question as a director, if you were describing this company, not from a financial standpoint, from a qualitative standpoint, how would you describe the company, and how do you think the employees would describe it? Really interesting way to think about the companies that we have some oversight for. The second point is one of the things that I like to do with clearly the CEO's knowledge is I always get to my board meetings early, and I do management by walking around. And I stop in people's office and just say, how are you doing? What's going on? What do you think about the quarter? Are you optimistic? You know, all of those kinds of questions. And there's never, ever a time that I would not, and the people know that I would not report back to the CEO if there's something. I'm not looking to catch that person. I'm really looking to get an insight that you don't necessarily get when everybody is sitting there very tense on the other side of the table, understanding that they're being viewed. When they're relaxed and when they're in their office, you get a whole different side of that person, and you get a sense of the culture in a way that you wouldn't otherwise. Just one method for getting an insight into the companies that we have responsibility for.
Theo, I might also,
Oh,
go ahead, John.
No, go ahead.
No, I was also going to add not just the walking around, but I'm certain that everyone does board dinners, right? Encourage additional people to come to those board dinners, to give the directors exposure to a broader swath of the organization, not just executives. And then as board members, engage in discussions that aren't just very specific to the material that you got, that you read ahead of time. Engage in what's going on, as Theo just mentioned, about what's happening in the company, because I think you get a very different insight, to your point, in their office, I might argue, to over a beer or over a glass of wine. You also may get a very different perspective that leads into other kinds of discussions besides.
John, I
Sorry,
think
John.
you had something.
No, I was just going to say that the Theo's phrase "management by walking around" came up so many times. And some directors are a little bit nervous about walking around at the company. They don't feel like they have the license to do that. Others do. But the ones that do and take advantage of that seem like they come at the problem with a much firmer base of knowledge than those that simply rely on those curated interactions.
I think one of my best experiences as a director is the company I've now tenured off holds a strategy couple days, and it includes mid-management, and they're all representing their business lines, their projects. And so you have one or two directors only attend each year, and you have this unfiltered opportunity to meet with really the up and coming talent and hear what they're thinking. And I found that to be one of the most positive and enlightening experiences that I've had as a director. So I would encourage, there are a lot of board members on here, to create those opportunities and take them for your boards.
And Sherry, just as a pylon for that, I might even say, as you have those strategy discussions, broaden out that succession discussion. Avoid just having your succession discussion about the CEO. So we saw that the question in the survey was about just the CEO. Broaden it out to say, as Theo talked about earlier, right? I might have the right people in place for this type of organization, but if this is where we're headed, who's in the pipeline that can lead us where we need to go? Or do we need to go find that talent? And incorporate that within that same strategy discussion besides.
And which leads us, is a perfect lead into the next question. And it comes from a 2022 NACD Summit Talent Oversight paper. And one of the myths, called it a myth, is finding diverse talent with the right skills is too hard and not under board purview. Comments on that? Open for anyone.
I think this goes back to some of the challenges that a lot of companies are facing, right? You know, a lot of companies are now starting to report diversity data broadly across their organization. EEO1 reporting their own version of that data. And when you look at across an organization broadly, a lot of companies are doing a really good job at bringing in, you know, an in aggregate diverse workforce. But a lot of companies have a problem in the middle that they don't want to talk about, which is promotion and retention rates among certain diverse populations when you get to that mid to senior level rank in the organization. BlackRock has the same issue. I promoted a woman on my team this year who is a woman of color to managing director, which is a senior rank in the banking financial services side. She came to me after that and said in the 30-year history of BlackRock, she was the 13th person of color, woman of color, to ever be promoted to MD. We have lots of people of color, women of color MDs, but most of them are brought in laterally, not promoted from within. And I don't think we're unique. I think a lot of companies face the same challenge. Different companies face different challenges aligned like that, but it's something that we should talk about and figure out how to solve. You know, where are we failing in our own internal systems to bring those populations along with the rest of everyone through the promotion cycles up and prepare them for senior level roles, prepare them to be directors 10, 15, 20 years from now. That system feels like it's not working well at a lot of companies. It's not a unique problem.
Can I just jump in and build on that for a minute? The next iteration of being transparent about data in that space is sharing promotion data publicly. It may surprise you to learn that a couple companies that are doing that are leading the way in that are Consolidated Edison of New York, an old, over 100-year-old utility is actually sharing its promotion data, and Walmart, who's doing that as well. We tend to think in terms of 7 metrics we're pushing towards using, and some of those becoming more transparent. You spoke about attrition. So attrition, performance ratings, obviously can't be transparent about that, but something to look at and be aware of. Promotions, your leadership pipeline, which includes both your future leader pool and your succession plan. Your employment pipeline, which a lot of people I think are sharing more transparently now. The last 2 are pay equity, which some organizations share publicly and make adjustments to. And the last would be inclusion metrics. So there are a number of metrics beyond, to your point, John, beyond just representation of demographics that organizations should be looking at, and directors can lean into and say, hey, are you looking at this stuff too, or are you just stopping at representation or employment or hiring rates?
Yeah, and we love it when we see that data from the outside. We know that not all companies are comfortable sharing it. It's concerning how few boards actually have that data at their fingertips and know what's going on at that level of detail. You know, the board has to carefully consider its role, right? They're not the HR manager, they're not the CHRO of the company, but they are in charge of overseeing the risk. And, in aggregate, looking at some of this data, I think is helpful in overseeing those risks. I really appreciate those comments.
And I think understanding what diversity means for your organization is important. When I was a CEO, we had 1,200 stores. And the challenge for us was, let's make sure that our stores represent the communities that they're in. So that if somebody comes in a Hispanic neighborhood, people in that store should be people who speak Spanish and people who are of the neighborhood, and we're going to do more business. And it absolutely, absolutely works. So if you're in Provo, Utah, it may be something different than that. But understanding the communities that you serve and having the workforce as being representative, then it doesn't become difficult because those people are already in that community. The difficult part is making sure that you have the right hiring practices, get to the right people, but it really isn't that hard. And then making sure that your pay practices and your promotion practices are equitable across the organization so that you do have those leadership ladders that people can climb up and get to those higher level positions. one of the interesting things about turnover that I love to look at is you look at an average turnover number, and as a board, we tend to say, what are the things that are going wrong? Who are the outliers? If our turnover is 30%, who are the people at 40 and 45? I love to look at the ones who are at 5 and 10% turnover and spend all my time understanding for the people who are getting it right, what are they doing? What are the systems, processes, and skills? And are those things translatable across the organization to other places? And normally it comes down to the quality of the person who's running that division or running that store or running that operation, and being able to understand who those people are, what their skills and capabilities are, and hiring those across the system makes a huge difference.
I think the key, though, to all of that is having, John, you made a comment about they're not at the fingertips. I think sometimes they're not in the meeting at all, right? And I think that part of it is getting comfortable to put people metrics, whatever they may be, whether they're about pay equity, whether they're about diversity turnover, whether about the diversity hiring, whether it's in general, where are we getting people, whatever the metric that's most important for your business, to be part of the metrics that are just reviewed as normal business metrics, much like we might review the financials. But I think many times that it's just not even in the conversation, which is why it's not at the fingertips.
So I feel like we ought to address what to me is an elephant in the room. And that is, for the time being, in some places, not all, DEI and even ESG is being dished or downplayed. Now, as corporations, have we gone far enough down that journey that we're going to continue it? Or do you think some of the geopolitical backlash on those subjects could hurt our efforts?
So I'm happy to offer a point of view. I think it starts with organizations having an understanding of what's right and what's wrong. Mm-hmm. And those things should not be governed by or legislated by an external force. What is the right thing to do for your organization? If the world has changed and more women are going to college than men, more women are entering the workforce, shouldn't you have the ability to have access to that group? Because women on boards was a really big thing a few years ago, and it's died out as a leading topic. DEI was a big thing post George Floyd. It's died out as a leading topic. ESG, human capital management, is on the front of the dashboard today. All of those things are still important. None of those things go away. And it's, our responsibility is to be able to, there's a definition, the definition of an agile mind is to be able to handle two conflicting thoughts in your mind without going crazy. As a board member, I think we have to be able to handle many conflicting issues and think about, is this the kind of company that I would want my 16-year-old to work for? And do they have the kind of culture? Do they have the kind of dynamics? And all companies don't fit all people, but I don't think any of those things should go away. If you're running a well-run company, you're doing the right things, and you're not doing those right things because they're legislated, governed, or because an institutional investor is telling you what to do. You're doing them because you understand you have a role in the community, and that you want to run a good company, and it incorporates all of those things.
Thank you, Theo. I think that's very insightful, and it reminds me of a saying I heard long ago, and I've used it many times. And it's, well, we can do this or we can do that, and the answer is it's an and world. It's not an or, it's an and. And I think you summarized that very well, that we've got to do all these things and continue to do them. I have one last question, though, and it's a little bit different. And it comes from another report that I read that identified, and I think it's very true for so many companies, that there are really two workforces. There are the people that you hire, that go through HR, get hired, get onboarded, get benefits. And then there are people who are hired as contingent workers through procurement or project managers that are a completely different set of a workforce. Now, what are our responsibilities in terms of listening to a workforce that may be contingent? It may be engineers, it could be data scientists, it could be day workers, it could be anything. What are your thoughts?
Listen, I'll take that. I think there's two sides. And I know that companies take two positions sometimes with this, right? It's that's a contingent, that's someone else's employee.
Yeah.
Having said that, they are your future employee. And so if you're not using that as part of the engagement, I'm not saying you're going to survey them, they're not your employees, right? And there's some reasons why you may choose that they're not your employees. But they may be your future people. And I think they may also tell you things that you don't hear from your other employees, generally. But I think if you think about it as they are the future employees, then you do listen to them. And they tell you things. Listen, if you are in industries where safety is critical, you're managing that contingent workforce just as you're managing your regular workforce relative to safety. So why are other things necessarily significantly different?
They're also going to influence the culture of the company, just like a full-time employee. They work side by side. Their complaints make their way around to everyone else's. Their successes are celebrated, just like full-time employees are celebrated. If you don't take them into account, you're doing yourself a massive disservice for a number of reasons.
If you believe that quote from Henry Ford, that the two most important things are reputation and people. Reputation is customers, reputation is contingents, reputation is disruption on social media. All of those things come into play, and you can't downplay any of them. You have to play up to them to be the kind of place that contingent workers are a great source of talent, because you have somebody who's on the job and you can see what the work is that they do. You want them to want to work for you. And the only way you do that is make them feel like this is an organization where people are heard and where they have a contribution to make to the organization. Hugely important.
I think those are all great observations. And Melinda, I really can relate to what you said. Your contingent worker is your future employee. And everything, and they impact your reputation just as anyone else, maybe more so. In another survey, 51% of respondents said the top 3 stakeholders for any company are your customers, your employees, and your investors. Would you tend to agree with that? Is anybody missing from that list?
Yeah, I mean, I would generally agree with it. When I became the CEO of, it was Zale Corporation, which at the time was its own public company, and it was a falling knife. The business had been losing money for 3 years, and it was about to go out of business. And the first thing that I did in a public forum was to say that we're going to do this organizationally, which is flip the pyramid and put the customer and the people who serve the customers on top, and put the CEO at the bottom, because we're only going to be successful if we serve the customers and if we serve the people who serve the customers. And a whole series of things ensued after that. If you are running a good company, if your people feel like they're part of the journey, if your people feel like those who are serving the customers are really important, all of the other stuff are trailing indicators. The success comes after that. The financial results comes out. Investors get really happy after that, but they're happy because you're running a well-run company where you've realized that engaged employees, engaged customers, people who are proud to come to work each day and talk about your company in positive ways, it's going to be infectious. It's absolutely going to be infectious.
The only thing I might add, Sherry, it's kind of back to Theo, what you talked about within your workforce and bringing people that kind of look like me, talk like me, et cetera, which is communities. I think that stakeholder is missing. And for some industries, it's even more important because of what's around your facilities and things like that. But how you bring those communities together, how you help your communities, because it goes back to the same thing on reputational quality, cultural quality, all those positive things that you get as an organization, more customers probably as you're helping your local communities, the customers that are coming in as well. So I think for me, that piece is missing from that list. I'd add a fourth one to that list.
And as an oil and gas person, my entire career, I agree totally. We've had several comments in the chat to that effect, that communities and that relationship in helping build the community is vitally important. And someone used the term license to operate. Absolutely, I agree. We're coming up now close to our time to end. And I'd like to, we're going to close, but we're also going to have an opportunity for more Q&A. But Theo, when we had our pre-meeting, you talked about passionately about the role of CHROs on the board. Could you just spend a little bit of time on that?
Yeah, sure. I think it's high time for boards to understand that all of this conversation, the things that we've been talking about today, sit squarely in the realm of the human resources manager. Whether you're talking about succession, whether you're talking about compensation, whether you're talking about ESG, whether you're talking about DE&I, when you're talking about getting a granular view of what's going on in the workforce and the workforce reputation, they fall squarely in the purview of competent human resources managers. Now, saying that, not like any other board position, you want the best of the best. You want somebody who understands P&L management, hopefully somebody who's had some operating experience in their background, or at least has taken the time to understand the P&L. But having those people in the room and digging into some of these questions helps to raise the quality of the question. So I think it's high time for people to start thinking about really quality CHROs as members of boards.
Thank you. And I'll give Linda and John, I want to give you guys also an opportunity for any final comments before we go to Q&A. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I guess I just did.
Listen, I'll start, and John is a investor to maybe finish up. But first off, for the CHROs on the call, right? Be the business strategist with your executive team. You are the advocate for this. You have this information. Make it a business discussion. Don't make it an HR discussion. Make it a business discussion, and be the one to help push that discussion to be a part of your board package, because I think that can help move that forward for the board to be able to provide that oversight. I would say for board members on the call, be that person to challenge the status quo, not just how you've always done it. Obviously be collegial in the process, but understand that, understand the issues, understand the risks that John talked about, right? It is an enterprise risk. Understand what that is, understand metrics, people metrics, as you understand business metrics. It's just another one. So you've got customer service metrics, you have customer acquisition, you have reliability and productivity, add in earnings, add in people metrics. It's how you run your business. And I think it's a miss if you don't have that part in your discussion. The last thing we talked earlier, somebody made a comment about quiet quitting. I think Sherry, you might have. I actually say avoid being distracted by buzzwords, because to be honest, quiet quitting's been around for a really long time. We just put a name on it. And I think if you focus on the metrics, you'll find out whether you got that thing going on, that people are leaving your organization for whatever reason, if you actually focus on those areas that are drivers for your business. And then lastly, as Theo mentioned, understand that people strategy so that you can achieve your future aspirations. Do we have the right people in place, executive or otherwise, to get you where you need to be?
And I guess I'll wrap this part up. As an investor, I come at it from a slightly different perspective, outside in. You know, as an investor, please help me understand where the board responsibility lies for overseeing this risk and how the board is doing it. I don't need to see the numbers and all the inside baseball granular data that the board is looking at and what's getting reported up by the CHRO. But I do need to get comfortable that the board is exercising that oversight on a regular basis. It's not a once a year committee topic that has 16 slides, goes through in about 10 minutes, and then isn't revisited until the next year. You know, give us something to work with so we understand what the processes are that the board is using. And then the second is, we didn't talk about this a lot, but a lot of the data that we've been talking about so far, the retention rates, attrition, promotion rates, are kind of lagging indicators of where culture is in the company. But a lot of companies are looking at leading indicators. They're doing pulse surveys, they're doing net promoter scores, they're doing all sorts of data collection internally. There's one company that we're invested in that every time an employee logs into their computer for the first time each day, they're given a survey question, answer, 1 to 5 stars, how much do you agree with this? And it's real-time data that they can look at to understand where we headed, where's the trend, where are the hot spots in the organization. And different people get different questions every day, so they get a pretty broad sense of where the company's going. I'm not recommending that as a practice, but it's a neat innovation. It's a neat way that companies are keeping on top of where the organization is going from a leading perspective. And then the board's asking questions about that now. The board's asking, well, how's this trending and how's that trending? And are there hot spots and are there different parts of the organization that are outliers on certain questions? I mean, that's a neat way that we're seeing boards start to advance in how they're getting involved with some of this data. So a couple takeaways from me here at the end. Sherry?
And just to flip it a little bit on what John said, if an organization thinks about this area as an opportunity, you have less likelihood to think about it as a risk. Because I think it's a huge opportunity. And one last little bitty thing that's a little off script. I don't know if she's still on, but there's a woman named Gina Ortiz-Jones, who, when I was reading through the people who are attending, is a retired Secretary of the Air Force. And I'd just like to acknowledge her and say, thank you for what you do and what you've done.
That's very kind. Thank you, Theo.
So I'm
One of my
looking.
heroes in human resources management is a retired 3-star general, and we have wonderful conversations about how the military enables ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Unbelievable models, something to think about.
That might be worth a new program, because we have several military members and thank all of them for their service. When companies scale from small to large, maybe private to public, sometimes they don't view the CHRO as an important role. What should a director do about that?
Again, the silence is deafening. I'll be happy to jump in there first. There's a model that I saw first 20 or 30 years ago that plots companies on an arc. And at the beginning of the arc, companies are in the explorer mode. My idea and my concept, is it going to work? Generally have 1 or 2 people who are highly engaged, work lots of hours, but there's no lack of clarity about the vision. You go from the explorer stage into, the entrepreneurial stage into the explorer stage. Entrepreneurial is when it's small and when you're thinking about the idea. Explorer stage is looking for proof of concept. If the concept work, you go into the conqueror barbarian stage, which is I'm chasing the business, and then you go into the administrator stage. The question really is referring to the administrator stage. At the administrator stage, you have to put in infrastructure, process, systems, human resources. Otherwise, the business collapses. So you can get up the arc to the administrator stage and forget that you have to have those things. It really is understanding what all the supporting processes are when you're in that administrative stage to support the business to be able to get into a growth stage and to accelerate it into the future.
You know, I have worked with some companies that are in that mode, doing some assessments and work. And I think for directors in particular, it's actually encouraging and being the person to say, you need this. And I know some board members that that have done this with some of the companies that I worked with, to say, this is something that you need. Here's what I've seen. Here's the impact that it has. And we're with you, and we're willing to put that investment in place with you to make that happen. So I think that it also takes the courage of the directors to actually push that issue with that company, whether it's a founder, whether it's a new CEO coming out of private to public, et cetera. But I think it takes that.
Thank you. And I see, Sam, you have your hand raised. I think you're on mute. There you go.
Yeah, I'm off of mute. Yes, I'm Sam Smolik. Hey, this has been a terrific discussion. And one comment I wanted to make, earlier we talked about management by walking around and getting to know the people and understanding the culture. And I think that's really important for board members to meet at least once a year at a manufacturing site or some location where the people are there. But I've seen two types of CEOs and how they feel about that. There's one that says, I welcome you to do it. I want you to get out there and give me the feedback that you hear. And then there's some CEOs that are very possessive and defensive. They almost don't want you talking to the people. Maybe they're hiding the dirty laundry, or I don't know what it is, but I just think it's a signal to board members if a CEO does not appreciate the talent of the board members that they have and use those to their full extent. So that's just something that I've observed through the years, and be on the lookout. You want the right kind of CEO out there that says, hey, come help me. Let's make this company great.
Yeah, and I think, Sam, you're absolutely right. And things like tone at the top, attitude surveys will start to give you data that'll reinforce your instinct that this person isn't a very open person, that they're managing thumbs down and from the top down. So getting the data that reinforces your instinct that this is not a person who's open and honest about everything that's going on is very helpful.
Hey, Sam, one thing I you know, as I was listening to your comment, I think that what made people great CEOs in the past are not necessarily what make people great CEOs today. And I think that your comments about those that don't want to use the expertise on the board or allow you to walk around might be those CEOs of the past, because that's their focus was on the numbers. That was kind of it. And you don't see anything else. And I think the workforce of the future and businesses of the future need those people that not only ask for help, get help, whether it's from board members or their workforce, and are pretty open, such that walking around is no issue. So I think thinking about whether it's the right CEO or it's the CEO that you need for the future, I think it's a great discussion that or a comment that you raised.
As an investor, we're always on the outlook for imperial CEOs. And this is one of those signs. I mean, that's just one step away from CEOs saying, directors, we don't want you to talk to the shareholders. Well, wait a second. The directors work for us. You know, that shouldn't be. Sam, I saw you trying to say something. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm sorry I was on mute. Yeah, to Melinda's comment, you know, the old adage, all of us are smarter than any of us. If you get a CEO and a board that's aligned and motivated to build a long-term sustainable company, it's powerful. And, you know, everybody's got to trust each other.
So we have one more question. It's maybe a little bit on the edge of this conversation, but I think it's worthwhile because it goes to the heart of the people issue. And it is, we are in disruptive times, specifically geopolitical risk and fast changing technology. How much should a board be concerned?
And the answer is they should be concerned. Most boards have a either risk committee or risk profile, and they have a fairly extensive view of what those things are. And you're looking at them as near term, short term, or longer term. And they are looked at in that way, so that while geopolitical may not be a short term, it may be something that you're thinking about longer term, particularly if you're thinking about international locations, or if you're like many of the businesses that I have, you have lots of your suppliers in China and you're thinking about moving things out of China. How do you think about that? It wasn't a priority a couple of years ago. It's a huge priority now. So some of those things, but having it on as conversations so that it's always in front of the board, and sometimes it's going to move to the front, sometimes it'll move to the secondary, and sometimes it'll go to tertiary, but having a robust sort of risk profile for your business. And I think John will probably jump in because this is the kind of stuff he likes to see. But having a robust, honest, and thorough risk profile for your business is critical, and it includes a lot of those issues.
You know, geopolitical and technological were both components of that question. My big concern over the short term is the technology piece. AI is poised to be such a disruptor from a human capital perspective over the next several years. We're taking a very careful look at how companies are governing the implementation of AI so that they don't disrupt the workforce any more than necessary. On the other hand, AI is going to be a great tailwind to company efforts over the next few years too. So how do you balance those two things? I think that's a core responsibility of the board to be thinking about. And I think that's probably one area where boards are less equipped to manage risk than they would like to be today.
And Gina, I think you have your hand up.
I do. Yeah. Thank you. Good morning. I appreciated the term earlier, human capital ecosystem, because it is about certainly managing the individual, but there are those things, and I saw it when I was at the Pentagon, and when you talk about kind of walking around leadership, it came up doggone at every town hall, which is childcare. Right. And this thing that is disproportionately affected our younger women. And unfortunately would leave folks sooner, we'd lose folks sooner than they were ready to leave as a result of this challenge with younger folks in particular. So I'd welcome kind of how you all as the board have thought about other parts of the ecosystem that are so critical to your point, not only about the strength of the business, but also reflects just a true understanding of some of the day-to-day challenges that affect the quality of life and quality of, I'll just say quality of service at the company. So something like childcare, if you could speak to something like that, or maybe something else in the ecosystem that you all grappled with. Thanks so much.
I think that this kind of goes back to the idea of having a highly competent human resources capital manager. Different than sort of chief people officer, but thinking about it as somebody who really manages my human capital in a thorough way. That person should have, as part of their responsibility, understanding what kind of goods, services, and processes we're offering to our workforce. Are we being responsive to them? And the board hopefully has enough visibility to that person has enough comfort to be able to talk to the board about those kind of issues and bring them up so that the board has an understanding of it. On boards where I have served and do serve as head of the compensation committee, I always have a relationship with the CHRO, and I talk to the CHRO on a regular basis, not just about the traditional incentives, but I think about childcare as an incentive. Pay is only one piece of incentive, right? So there's all kinds of comprehensive incentives, and you want to have thoughtful conversations about those incentives in a way that's keeping your workforce motivated and focused on the jobs that they have to do. Childcare, one of many, many others.
And I think the ecosystem questions or issues, if you know if you know what the makeup of the workforce is, you know what questions to ask about what other pieces of that eco are important to your organization. Because it may or may not be childcare for one part of the organization. It might be elder care. I'm making this up, right? Because of where your workforce is today. I'm not saying it might not be something for the future that's necessary, but I think asking those questions is pretty important. And I agree with Theo. It's usually at that compensation committee asking some of those types of questions makes a ton of sense. By the way, one thing I didn't mention earlier that I actually was about it was kind of akin to the walking around, but I would also think about opportunities as board members where you can engage where it seems really natural. So for example, are there ways that you do a town hall, or maybe pieces of the board might do a town hall with some of the employees? Maybe it's a women's town hall, maybe it's a male town hall, maybe it's a people of color town hall, depending upon what your board makeup is, so that people can ask board members questions more broadly than the people that they're generally exposed to. And just, I think of those natural opportunities, because there's times in the world of things that are happening that board members have a perspective that might be different than the executives. And it also makes you feel like you know those people that are providing oversight to your organization. And I think it's really important. Sorry, I apologize for going off topic just a little bit.
We have one more question, and we're just about out of time. And it's a little bit, I think it's going to be a difficult one for this group, but I'll go ahead and throw it out there, and I can take it myself. From a technical hiring standpoint, I find that senior management often hires the wrong AI leadership people. How can a board help with this? That is a tough question, because this is such an evolving field. And it's a relatively new field. In fact, before last May, probably most of board members hadn't even heard of AI, or it was in the background. I think the board has to start becoming educated itself, along with management teams. And there are many ways to do that. Reading articles probably isn't one of them, but attending seminars and interfacing with the technical teams is perhaps another one. I do think this is going to be a challenge. It's a tight field right now. It's evolving. It's still relatively new. And but I appreciate the question and understand the frustration. And really, until the people doing the hiring become a little bit more educating themselves, it's probably going to continue being a challenge. I'll let anybody else comment on that.
I'm going to stick John on the front of the grill, since he had such a strong point of view about AI.
You know, yesterday I met with the Screen Actors Guild and the Actors Guild over the strike that they're having right now. And one of the central tenets to that situation is use of AI. And the workforce is there, 14,000 screenwriters. Sorry, I may have this backwards, 140 something thousand actors. They are very concerned about their long-term viability as a career option because of AI. And the more that we talk to companies, the more we understand that there are employee bases all over the place that are very, very nervous about implementation of AI and what that means about the future of their careers, of their work. And it's creating a bit of a culture disruption in a lot of companies. I think there's going to be some stumbling before we figure out what the right way is to manage this. And no one's got it perfect yet. Honeywell's been dabbling in AI for 50 years. They're probably the ones that are furthest along AI before it was called AI. Leadership is a bit of a problem, because no one knows what that leadership looks like. No one knows what the key issues for success are yet.
If I could, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
I was going to drop in a comment. I work for I'm the board of an AI machine learning company that actually pioneered dynamic pricing about 35 years ago in the airline industry. And I'll tell you one thing we've learned is that you hear the phrase, less is more. When you're pioneering into a new area, more is more. And what I mean by that is, this is where cognitive diversity really comes into play. We don't know where AI is going, where it's going to take us. So the more people you have with a differentiated point of view that are in the discussion, the better chance you have of seeing what's coming down the road. So my advice would be to not be too narrow about who's involved in that conversation, but to broaden those discussions so you get that cognitive diversity that allows you to see things that you may not have seen before.
Lee, I think the point I would add to that is, I don't think any of us as board directors are going to be experts in this area, just like we may not be experts in cybersecurity. But I think opening yourself up to reading and asking questions, I'll do my little shameless plug for NACD. Sherry started out with the governance outlook for 2023. There's so much spectacular information in there, including how directors to think about being stewards of human capital, reading that information so that you can ask good questions, being in forums. I'm not sure if it's on the agenda for Washington, D.C., but hopefully many of you will be in D.C. and be able to take advantage of some of the educational opportunities down there. It's having that ongoing curiosity about information and pushing yourself into uncomfortable situations so that you can learn a little more and ask better questions.
Okay, well, we're coming up to the end of the session, and I just want to reemphasize what's been said. I think on this topic, I just finished a course in AI, and the more you do to educate yourself as a board member or C-suite executive, the better and more open you will become to the different ideas. It's a big topic. I mean, it ranges everything from machine learning, which has been going on a long time, to now what we're seeing as generative AI, which is really, I think, what most people see as the looming threat / opportunity. There are lots of seminars, take advantage of them, and you'll be a better director or C-suite executive. And thank you to the panelists. You guys were fabulous.